Today, we're going to take a look at depth of field in Maya. First of all, we'll need something to render in our scene. So for this example, I will go to my content browser and I'll bring in a wasp. Rather than using the default perspective camera, I recommend creating a new camera. I'm going to rename my new camera, My Camera. And I'm going to go to my top viewport, Panels, Look Through Selected. Now I'm looking through my camera. We can't see anything because the camera is actually inside the wasp right now. So if I just zoom out, we can see our wasp. I recommend turning on the resolution gate, which will allow us to see the borders of our composition. And so that you can better see the depth of field effect, I'm going to change my background render to a color that will be something a little more neutral. In my attribute editor, under Environment, Background Color, I'll just make it a gray. And let's create a render and see how it looks. One thing I want to mention to you is that I am rendering using Maya software right now. Okay, so one thing to take note of. Everything is perfectly crisp and clear in my image. That is because I need to activate depth of field to use it. With my camera selected, in the attribute editor, under the header depth of field, you'll see that there's a checkbox, depth of field. And if I check that and turn it on, what you'll notice is in my working viewport, the wasp has become blurry. If I want to actually see the effect, it's very important that I render it out. Let's see how it looks. Okay, so you can see that depth of field is in fact working, but the problem is that everything is blurred out right now. To get the desired effect, we need to first determine how far the object is from the camera. So, to do that, what I will do is I will select my object, go to Display, Heads-Up Display, Object Details. And what you'll notice is that my wasp is 15.282 centimeters from the camera. You'll see that right here. This information will be necessary so that we can effectively use the depth of field. So, what I will do is I will select my camera. Under depth of field, focus distance, I'll put in that number that I recorded earlier, 15.282 centimeters. And let's render it out and see how it looks. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Notice that the wasp is mostly in focus now, however the head is still a bit blurry. To effectively use depth of field, there is one more parameter you'll need to be aware of, and that is the camera's f-stop. Let's see what happens if I increase the f-stop. Notice that everything is now in pretty sharp focus. A higher f-stop results in a wider area or range being in focus. Let's contrast that with a very low Okay. Now notice that my image has an extremely narrow range of depth of field, resulting in a very narrow band of my wasp being in focus. I want the head of my wasp to be in sharp focus, so I need to determine how far the wasp's head is from the camera. To do this, I will use a locator, which I will snap to the wasp's head. This locator will help me determine the wasp's head's distance from the camera. To create a locator, I go to Create, Locator. I will snap it to my wasp's head. And notice that the distance from the camera is now 12.983 centimeters. Once again, I'll select my camera, and I will take that focus distance parameter and change it to 12.983 centimeters. And render it out again. Now that the wasp's head is in sharper focus, I can fine-tune the f-stop to get the right range of depth of field for my image. I'll try an f-stop of 16. Looking a little bit better. I think I'd actually like it to be a little bit less in focus. The head I want in focus. The back of the wasp I want to be slightly more blurred. So I'll lower that f-stop. And I think I like it. So that's how you can use depth of field in Maya. Okay, now let's take a look at an example where we might actually want to use depth of field. So, I've created the sample scene with a bunch of grasses and wildflowers in it, and I've placed my camera, creating the composition that I want. Let's render it out and see how it looks. Okay, so as you can see, everything is crisp and clear, nothing is blurred out. The flower, which I want my viewer's attention on, is very clear, but so is the background, which is very busy. So what I want to do is I want to make the flower be very crisp and clear, and I want the background to recede by becoming blurred out. And I will do this by using depth of field. Okay, so if you remember, the first step is select the camera, go to its attribute editor, depth of field, and enable depth of field. If we render that out, you'll see that depth of field has been enabled. However, the flower is blurred out. That's because we haven't told our camera how far the focus distance should be. So let's determine that now. I've already created a locator in my scene that is at the point where I want the flower to be in focus. So that locator is located 11.986 centimeters from the camera. So if I pick my camera and I take the focus distance and I put that number in, 11.986, and then I render, I get the image as I want it. The flower is now in sharp detail. Well, in fact, you can see that the front petal, where I put the locator, is in sharp detail. The back of the flower starts to recede and becomes a little blurred out, and then the background is only hinted at or suggested at because it's become very blurred by using the depth of field. I like the depth of field as it is. However, I want you to remember that you can adjust it by adjusting the f-stop for the camera. To do that, remember that what you do is you select the camera, go to the attribute editor, and then right under the focus distance is the f-stop, and right now it's set to 5. Let's see what happens if we change that to 16. And now you can see that the whole flower is in sharper focus than it was before. So that is how you can use depth of field with the sample scene of flowers in a field or meadow. To learn how to use depth of field, create a scene with 3 objects in it of various distances from the camera. In my scene I have 3 wasps, one which is close to the camera, a second one further from the camera, and a third one further yet from the camera. Remember that to use depth of field you have to activate it by selecting the camera, opening its attribute editor, and enabling depth of field. Determine which object you want to have in focus, find out its distance from the camera, and set that as the focus distance. Finally, adjust the f-stop to change the amount of focus. Lower f-stops will have a narrower band or range of depth of field. Larger f-stops will have a wider range of depth of field. Now let's take a look at my 3 renders of the wasps. My first render has the wasp closest to the camera in sharper focus. My second render has the wasp at the mid distance in sharper focus. And finally, my last render has the furthest wasp in sharper focus. In summary, depth of field refers to the distance an object is from the camera and how sharp or in focus that object is. Artists intentionally use depth of field to give more importance to some areas of their composition while downplaying or de-emphasizing other areas. Through the use of lenses and aperture settings, photographers and cinematographers use cameras to focus on specific areas of interest. In Maya, as well as other 3D modeling and animation software, we can use virtual cameras to create the very same effect.